big is this yuppie part of town?
Town?
The
whole world's like this.
What's up, everybody? I'm Finn McKenty. This is the Punk Rock MBA, and today we're here to talk about the Dead Kennedys, a band whose lyrics and ideas may be even more relevant today than when they were first written over 40 years ago. Arguably the most popular band in the first wave of hardcore, they walked away from the nihilism and self-destruction of early punk and instead focused on satirical social commentary, taking on everything from the overreach of California's so-called progressive government, to the then new influence of MTV. They even managed to piss off Tipper Gore and get sued for obscenity along the way. But what I believe is their most important contribution is calling out the increasingly conformist culture of punk, pointing out how punk had become the exact thing that it was created to rebel against. In their words, a closed-minded, self-centered social club. So the question is, what is the lasting impact and legacy of the Dead Kennedys? And does their music hold up today? Those are the questions that I will answer in this video. And also, I'd like to thank Manscaped for sponsoring this video. And I've got something special that is going to take your grooming game to the next level, the Manscaped Performance Package 5.0 Ultra. And you can get it at manscaped.com/punkrockmba if you use the code punkrock. It includes the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra. It comes with 2 interchangeable skin-safe blade heads. It also has an LED spotlight, and it's waterproof, so you can do your thing in the shower with shaving cream, maybe even a bubble bath if that's your thing. And you get the Weed Whacker 2.0 for taming all those unruly nose and ear hairs. Plus the Crop Soother Ball Aftershave Lotion, and yes, you do need that. And for that final touch, the Crop Preserver Lotion. But that is not all. The package also includes 2 free gifts. The Shed 2.0 travel bag to hold all this stuff, and their Boxers 2.0, which I truly, sincerely love. So if you want to check it out, go to manscaped.com/punkrockmba and use the code punkrock. The first time I heard Dead Kennedys is when I randomly bought Frankenchrist in maybe 1991 or so after seeing their name in Thrasher, but their origins go back much further than that. The Dead Kennedys formed in 1978 in San Francisco, California, in the classified ads of the weekly alternative newspaper called The Recycler. As the Dead Kennedys vocalist Jello Biafra tells it, it was actually Ray, the guitarist, who put the band together. He put a little ad in a store, guitarist wants to form punk band, so I rang him up, we got some songs together in the garage. Then we got this guy called Klaus to play bass. And they wasted no time getting started, playing their first show after being a band for only 6 weeks. And shortly after that, they recorded their first release, a 7-inch with California Über Alles and The Man with the Dogs, which came out in 1979. And even though it was their very first recording, they had basically nailed what would go on to become the Dead Kennedys' signature point of view. The first thing was just the name of the band, which was obviously incredibly shocking because it came off as extremely disrespectful to JFK in an era when it was still very taboo to talk about a president like that. And second was their sound, which was obviously based in punk, but also had elements of like surf guitar, and of course Jello's distinctive vocals, which are almost more like theatrical spoken word than they were traditional rock vocals. And the cover art, which was a collage-style illustration of then California Governor Jerry Brown in a sort of hippified version of a Nazi rally. And I want to get into that a little bit because this specific song really defines a lot of what made the Dead Kennedys great. First of all, just to sort of frame this, Jerry Brown may have been the governor of California, but he was a very liberal politician by any definition, especially back in the 70s. And he was taking over from Reagan as governor, who was obviously very conservative. So it seemed kind of odd that this leftist band would also be coming for a leftist politician like that. But what they were calling out is what they saw as the kind of weirdly, sneakily oppressive nature of the rising hippie, new age kind of culture that was coming up in California at the time. For example, the references to 1984 and Thought Control, and the line, "It's the suede and denim secret police, they have come for your uncool niece." The idea being that yes, these may be so-called progressive politicians and their supporters, but at the end of the day, they were still trying to control you, and it was just the same boss in a different outfit. And so the point here is that they weren't just ranting against the usual easy targets like the cops and religion and all that sort of thing, although they certainly did do that as well. They were willing to call out bullshit anywhere they saw it, even from what might traditionally be looked at as their own team. And around this same time, Jello Biafra made national headlines when he ran for mayor of San Francisco, on a platform that included some, let's just say, very interesting ideas like forcing all business people to wear clown suits within city limits, and paying laid-off workers to panhandle in wealthy neighborhoods. And what's really amazing is that he somehow managed to actually finish in third place.
One candidate who took his campaign to the streets today in a way that only he can. Jello Biafra, the lead singer in the punk rock group The Dead Kennedys, he held a news conference at City Hall. He then went on to do what he calls shaking babies and kissing hands. He also went on a whistle-stop tour through parts of San Francisco today on a BART train. No telling how he'll do in the elections, but his philosophy is summed up in his campaign slogan, "There's always room for Jello."
And they followed that up with their first full-length album, Fresh Fruit for Rotting Vegetables, which once again wasn't afraid to address bullshit from what I guess you could call their own team, in songs like Holiday in Cambodia. This song is essentially calling out American college students and activists who were protesting the genocide that the communist government was committing in Cambodia at the time, but doing all this from the safety and comfort of their dorm rooms, and then going back to their safe, easy lives when it was convenient. They also called out Jane Fonda for being a pawn of the Viet Cong in Kill the Poor, while also taking, I guess you could say, more traditional leftist positions in songs like Let's Lynch the Landlord, where they go after scumbag slumlord landlords.
Let's lynch the landlord, man!
And then there were other songs that were basically just silly and ridiculous, like their cover of Elvis Presley's Viva Las Vegas. It all added up to something that felt like kind of a fever dream. Something that was like half a tribute to the American mainstream culture of the 1950s and 60s, but also at the same time being like a biting, sarcastic parody of exactly that. Which I think is pretty much what it was when you hear Jello Biafra talk about his influences as a child that shaped his worldview. I saw Lee Harvey Oswald get shot. I saw the Berlin Wall go up. It was also back in the day when there were only 3 competing TV networks and they took pride in their news coverage. So things like Vietnam and starving children and Biafra, which is where I took my name, were right there on the evening news, completely uncensored. And they followed that up with the In God We Trust Incorporated EP, which took their music in more of like a straightforward hardcore kind of direction along the lines of maybe MDC or DRI, including one of their most iconic songs, Nazi Punks Fuck Off, which dealt with the very real issue at the time of Nazi skinheads showing up to punk shows and causing all kinds of problems. But they started to push the boundaries of their music a little bit more with their second album, Plastic Surgery Disasters, in 1982, which did have some straightforward hardcore songs like Terminal Preppy, which took aim at the universal enemy of all outcasts in the 1980s, namely preppies. But then there were other songs like Moon Over Marin, which slowed things down and focused more on Ray's kind of psychedelic surf guitar leads than just straight out hardcore. And they followed that up with the album that introduced me to the band, 1985's Frankenchrist. And this is probably the exact worst place that a 13-year-old could have started with the band. I wanted it to sound like MDC or the Circle Jerks, just like punishing hardcore, and it definitely does not sound like that. It's their most experimental album by far, drawing more from like surf guitar and psychedelic rock than hardcore. For example, the song Soup is Good Food, which almost sounds like something that could have been on Ren and Stimpy.
The unions agree, sacrifices must be made. Computers never go on strike. To save the working man, you gotta put him out the past.
Or At My Job, which sounds more like Kraftwerk or something than it does Black Flag. And lyrically, this album covers much more interesting territory than your typical 1980s hardcore band. For example, Soup is Good Food is talking about all the waves of layoffs facing blue-collar factory workers in the 80s, as jobs in manufacturing either went overseas or were taken over by automation. And this is one of the best examples of how ahead of their time the Dead Kennedys were, because obviously this has only become even more of an issue, especially now as AI is getting to the point where it's even threatening white-collar jobs. Some of the other songs, in my opinion, are a little bit more predictable, such as Jockorama, which once again takes aim at jocks, the eternal enemy of punks, and MTV Get Off the Air, which you can probably guess what that's about from the title, which is a perfectly fine song, but it sort of lacks the wittiness or nuance that makes their best songs like Holiday in Cambodia or California Über Alles much more interesting to me. This album also created a controversy that would ultimately help bring about the demise of the band. The album packaging included a poster by the Swiss artist H.R. Giger, who is best known for designing the monsters in the Aliens movies. And I can't show you the artwork here, but you can go look it up. Basically, it's a montage of a bunch of penises and vaginas. And the album actually included a warning on the outside packaging, but after a young girl allegedly bought the album and her parents found it, apparently that was not enough. Police raided Jello Biafra's house and brought him up on obscenity charges. And this became a national news story as part of the sort of larger conversation around the censorship of music with the Satanic Panic and Tipper Gore's PMRC and all that happening. And it even got him on the Oprah Winfrey Show years later.
In my case, I can relate to NWA's song about the police because after my record, Frankenchrist, was blasted by Susan Baker and the PMRC in Variety, 2 weeks later, 9 police officers, 3 from LA, 6 from San Francisco, broke a window by my front door, stormed into my house, tore the place apart like you'd see KGB people doing a TV movie or something.
And although he was offered a plea bargain deal by the prosecutors, he chose to fight. He started a foundation called the No More Censorship Defense Fund to raise money for their legal bills and ultimately won, with all charges being dropped by 1986. And in hindsight, even the prosecutor recognized that this whole case was a huge mistake on his part, saying, "The whole thing was a comedy of errors. About midway through the trial, we realized that the lyrics of the album were in many ways socially responsible, very anti-drug and pro-individual. We were a couple of young prima donna prosecutors." But despite everything that they had going on, the band managed to release one more album called Bedtime for Democracy in 1986. And musically, it was a return to their hardcore roots. And in my opinion, it has 2 of their very finest moments in terms of lyrics that really show the Dead Kennedys at their best. Nuanced, thoughtful, and many, many steps ahead of the rest of the pack in terms of critical thinking. The first example of that is the song Chicken Shit Conformist, which is essentially about how the punk scene became the exact thing that it initially sought to rebel against. Dogmatic, inflexible, and hostile to new ideas.
Punk's not dead, it just deserves to die when it becomes another stale cartoon.
I wasn't around when this song came out in 1986, so I can't comment what the scene was like back then, but I did see this exact dynamic play out in the 90s when I was getting into the scene. I saw that there was a group of punk rock cool kids that were friends with all the right bands and dressed better than everyone else and basically ran the scene just like it was my high school lunchroom. And that was a huge bummer to me because wasn't punk supposed to be different? Wasn't this supposed to be the place where all the outcasts could be accepted? And you can see the same thing now when you look at the way the punk scene reacts to anything new. For example, any of the new artists that Epitaph Records puts out, like NASCAR Aloe or Lil Lotus. Go look at the comments on Epitaph's YouTube or Facebook page whenever they announce a new song. And it's nothing but a bunch of aging punk dudes complaining that this doesn't sound like Pennywise or Total Chaos, which to me completely misses the point of punk. To me, punk was never supposed to be a specific sound, and it definitely wasn't supposed to be a specific way that you look or dress. There was never supposed to be a punk rock uniform. I mean, if you go back to the old bands, punk could mean anything from the Screamers to the Germs to Television and anything in between. To me, punk was always a state of mind and a way of looking at the world. It was specifically about questioning these kind of rules that the authority figures created for whatever reason. And it definitely wasn't about just slavishly emulating what other bands did 10, 20, or 30 years ago. And so I think that song's message is more relevant now than ever. Another great example of that is the song Where Do You Draw the Line, which very directly questions a lot of the accepted punk rock ideology.
How
mean, that's a pretty good question, right? If the punks did get their wish of anarchy, wouldn't that just turn into might makes right? That may be obvious now, but back then, I don't think many people were asking those kind of questions. And the chorus of the song is even more direct. Where do you draw the line? I'm not telling you, I'm asking you. Which to this day, I think is incredibly profound. Because personally, even as a teenager, I had gotten tired of these sort of self-righteous punks getting up on stage and lecturing me like they had all the answers to solving all the world's problems. So to hear the Dead Kennedys say basically, fuck man, I don't know, I'm just trying to figure this stuff out just like you are, to me, that was incredibly refreshing. And ultimately a reflection of much deeper critical thinking than all these bands just getting up on stage and hitting you over the head with the same tired political ideology over and over and over. But even as the Dead Kennedys had arguably hit their creative peak, exhausted by their legal battles and probably by what the punk scene had become, instead they chose to break up. And post-breakup, things got messy with years of legal disputes and trash talking in the press. To make a long story short, the rest of the band sued Jello Biafra over unpaid royalties, a lawsuit that he eventually lost, and was forced to pay them what he owed, as well as signing over the rights to the majority of the Dead Kennedys catalog. And Jello's version of it is, quote, basically, they sued the shit out of me. What triggered the falling out was my refusal to let Holiday in Cambodia be used in a Levi's commercial. Dockers, no less. I mean, to me, that would be the worst possible stab in the back I could give to everybody who supported our music and the vision behind it. The band then reformed without Jello, touring under the Dead Kennedys name with a different vocalist, and playing all the classic Dead Kennedys songs, including lyrics that were almost exclusively written by Jello. But at least as of now, they haven't written or recorded any new material. And just like with Black Flag and the Misfits, who did something similar, fans are divided on this. On the one hand, it's a chance for a lot of people who weren't around in the 80s to finally see this legendary band. And yeah, obviously it's not the same without Jello, but still it's better than nothing, right? But to other people, it feels like a cash grab and maybe even a little bit shady. Especially when the first wave of shows happened, and there were rumors that the band kind of deliberately hid the fact that Jello wasn't the vocalist for these shows. And personally, I'm never really a fan of these sort of reunion tours, especially when it's not the original lineup. I prefer when bands let the past be the past. And for me, I would rather watch some grainy 4th generation VHS copy of a show from the 80s when the band was in their prime, than see some sort of lineup with replacement members essentially playing covers of themselves and lyrics that Jello wrote. But that's just me, and I understand if other people feel differently. Which brings us to the last question: what is their lasting impact and influence? Well, for one, I would count them as one of the very few bands from the late 70s punk scene that have really stood the test of time and stayed relevant for all these years. And of those bands, probably only the Ramones and Black Flag have as much currency as the Dead Kennedys do today. And second, what's really incredible to me is how much their lyrics and ideas hold up today despite being incredibly specific to events of the 80s. For example, Holiday in Cambodia was about something that happened almost 50 years ago and most people in America probably aren't even aware of now. But the sort of larger topic of smug activists shouting slogans from the safety and comfort of their homes is even more relevant now than ever in the age of Twitter. And in my opinion, there's never been a more urgent need for critical thinking than there is now, with social media allowing you to basically validate any terrible idea that you might have, especially in the punk scene, which unfortunately, I have to say, I don't think has really evolved since the 90s. So if you haven't given their discography a listen, especially songs like Chicken Shit Conformist, now would be a great time to do exactly that. All right, my friends, that does it for this episode. As always, let me know what you think in the comments. Also, I would like to thank everyone who supports me on Patreon, especially those of you who support at the True Cult level or above. Patrons get access to all my videos and podcasts a week early. There are members-only channels in my Discord that I'm super active in. I do giveaways sometimes, and there is a way to have me review your music. So if any of that sounds cool, hit the link in the description of this video. And with that, I'm going to sign off for now, but I will see you next time.